Well, welcome back, listeners. So glad that you can rejoin us. And today I'm very excited to have Dr. Laura Farnsworth with me. She shares a very similar path, although I'm quite envious that she got to go through my master's alma mater as opposed to the one that I went through. But I'm going to allow Laura to introduce herself, and then we're going to kind of dive in to the world of hormones, which most of you know I geek out on. It was my first love. And now I'm kind of trying to pass the torch to other people because I'm stuck in the mental health world, working on that. But my hormonal stuff definitely comes into play. So we're going to be talking about hormones, and we may pivot from this direction to that direction. So hopefully, if you're not driving while you're listening to this, you have a pen and paper handy because I guarantee it's going to be full of interesting information. So, Dr. Laura, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you got into this field and why you geek out on the hormones.
Oh gosh, yeah. So I have first of all, I'm Laura Farnsworth, and thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to meet
Of
with you and
course.
talk about hormones, perimenopause, and menopause, which I'm so passionate about. So a little bit about my background. So as you mentioned, we both have doctorates in clinical nutrition. And yes, I went through your alma mater for your master's. And prior to that, I do have a course, a Master of Science in Nutrition and Integrative Health. I also have what's called a certified nutrition specialist credential, which is kind of similar to a registered dietitian for functional nutritionists. Prior to that, I've worked with women as a fitness coach and a childbirth educator, went to massage school. So that's where I really got my foundation with traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, and I usually refer back to that. In fact, it's so interesting how circadian rhythm concepts are coming into current research whereas they were previously in some of these other thought processes. So it's so exciting to me to read this research. So the why I got into this space initially, well, first of all, I've always had a passion for nutrition. I remember being a teenager, going to health food stores and reading literature, and always wanted to pursue that. Back in the day, I'm a little bit older. I'm 55. You didn't have the online programs, so I kept, trying to find a program that fit me or, that I could go to access. And
Mhm.
finally found the master's program that I did find. But it's always been a love for me. And what was the final like pushing me, I've got to do this, was my son was diagnosed with 12 food allergies in infancy,
Wow.
exclusively breastfed through 6 months of age. So none of us have any food allergies. So this was like, okay, I'm spending so much of my time reading research. I might as well just get a degree in this. I'm like, that's finally what pushed me in that direction to finally get the degree. Um, and I previously did specialize in women's health for,
Mhm.
in pregnancy, that kind of thing as a childbirth educator previously. But now that I'm 55, this whole perimenopause, menopause thing really resonates with me.
Of
So,
course.
so that is the reason why I went into this. But it's also very, interesting. It's stimulating for me as a
Mhm.
practitioner because there's a lot of complexity that comes with this life phase. You've got, all the wonderful, migraines and autoimmune conditions and things like that, that really need a lot of background education and clinical work to help work through that. Um, and again, why I chose this life phase is not just, of course, because of my age, but because I feel like so many women don't have the guidance that they need. It's kind of like puberty in reverse. And many of us had sisters or a mother or some female person in our lives that we could help us through this process. And many of us in
Mhm.
this life phase do not have the closeness, the connection, the support that we need to make this an easier transition and process.
Yeah. I think you and I kind of follow a very similar pathway because when I got into the field of nutrition, I mean, this was what, 15? I mean, this was before I was formally trained. I mean, I did a lot in my undergrad as well, even though that wasn't my undergraduate degree. Um, but I always tell my clients, especially my women clients, like I've grown up with my clientele in essence, right? Because I started out with, let's get every woman pregnant that we possibly can. And then I was like, well, wait a minute, I have nothing really to do with that. That would be awkward. But
Yeah.
like as I'm going through, now we're all in this other, why do I smell weird things all of a sudden?
Yes.
Where did this come from? Why can't I sleep anymore? Why does the sound of breathing want me to chew my spouse's face off? I don't understand. So we're all kind of in that same pathway, and it sounds very similar to what you are doing in terms of your own career and your own background and having that personal experience of I get it, I hear you, and I know what it feels like to be somewhat dismissed by the mainstream medical community because we're no longer, breeding age. So therefore, oh, there's nothing. You don't need pelvics anymore. You don't need this anymore. You don't just go get your boobs smashed in a machine, radiated, and here's some drugs. Good luck, and we'll see you in a
Yes.
few years.
Yes.
And, I don't know about you, but I know my clientele, they come and they're so distraught and disappointed and disillusioned with the mainstream care for our age group because I'm neck and neck with you.
Yes.
Um, so tell me a little bit about maybe your own personal experience or an experience of a client that kind of just sinks it all in for you that this is your passion and this is what you were meant to do.
Well, when I have these, opportunities to work with my clients, and they're usually women, I do work with men, but that's where I have the most skill set. So that's why I work primarily with women in this age group. And we work together, and I always learn something new, but there are some times when I'm still kind of surprised, such as I had a client who even had labs that reflected she was in either perimenopause or menopause, and yet her primary physician insisted that she was not. So if
Oh,
you can just imagine this woman feeling like she's losing her mind, she is
mm-hmm.
going nuts. And I'm like, okay, do you see here? Let's look at the labs together. And even this is demonstrating that, and kudos to the practitioner, though, to actually run the labs. I mean, so often women don't
Sure.
even have lab work done. They're saying, oh, well, have you not menstruated for 1 year? Okay, now you're in menopause. And there is, as you mentioned, so little, it's coming around, but so little
Mhm.
research for women of this age group because, well, what purpose does it serve in their, researchers' minds? But this is a large group of in our country, aging women who need support, who need to
Mhm.
make this process a whole lot easier. And unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation out there. So little training in the medical community in perimenopause and menopause. They receive very little, even gynecologists, endocrinologists are receiving so little training. So
Mhm.
the general public then is at a loss because they don't have the guidance that they need. So I'm trying to bridge that gap, do as much research as I can, in addition to the formal education that I've received and focusing on this age group in perimenopause and menopause, and learning about the hormones and learning about things that I'm even surprised on a daily basis going, why didn't they tell me this? Why don't people know this?
Yeah.
Such as the reasons why certain things happen, like a weight gain might be happening, and trying to educate and explain that to my clients so they feel more empowered. They have an awareness and an understanding, and then we can work with that, tweak it, and make it work to their benefit.
That's amazing. And yeah, I mean, it is a lackluster educational moment because so much is spent on the fertility side and
Yes.
IVF or IVI and like I mean all of the things that we get forgotten and it's heartbreaking and enraging, personally.
Yes, yes,
But to
yes,
listen to story after story of, well, my doctor says X, Y, or Z, like there's no reason for me to have these. It's all in my head. And I'm like, well, it might be in your head. But when I say that, I'm talking about your hypothalamus and pituitary. I'm not
yes.
talking about you're crazy because I don't know you that well. We'll get to that later. What are some of your favorite? either modalities or assessments? Like, how do you even start with one of your female clientele?
Yes, so I am considered a functional and integrative nutritionist. So I do look at root causes, but I lean into that integrative a whole lot more than I think a lot of my colleagues do, because I find that I get the most results with just the basics. So my favorite modalities are actually, hey, are you getting enough sleep? Hey, how are you managing your stress? Hey, are you feeling connected with others? These basic things that people often overlook, or, oh, that doesn't make a difference if I get enough sleep. I've been doing this for, 40 some years, and huge, and I'll even have the research. Some of my clients want the research, so I'll throw that in there with their
Right.
recommendations. But the research is even reflecting how important that is. So I lean a lot into that. I do, of course, recommend dietary modifications. We do talk about meal quality, nutrient quality as being the foundation. But we will also talk about, I like to know from the start of their day to the end of their day, I want to know their schedule. When do you eat? When do you snack? When do you do certain things to get an idea of the flow of their day? Another interest of mine recently is going back, as I mentioned earlier, circadian rhythms and how
Hmm.
this affects our organ function. It affects our mood. It affects our nutrient absorption. So looking at circadian rhythms, and if possible to eat according to circadian rhythms, a lot of times can make a positive impact in how they're able to metabolize the foods, how they're able to utilize that or energy in the foods. So looking at that and going back to, because by nature, I'm a naturalist, redundancy there, but I like to just go back to the basics. And I didn't mention this, but my undergraduate degree was in psychology and social sciences. So I focused a lot on cultural anthropology. I took a lot of those courses. So
Hmm.
whenever I am coming across a new dietary trend,
Hmm.
I always ask myself, what would my ancestors do? Would they have done this? What about indigenous groups? Is this something that they would do? So going back to the basics, because a lot of times we've been disconnected from that with all the technology and not being outside
Sure.
as much, not getting the sunlight or daylight that we need. We're just really disconnected from nature.
Oh my gosh. I swear it's like looking at a reflection of myself, much more attractive, by the way, but
Oh
a
gosh.
reflection of myself because my undergrad is also in psych,
Yes.
and I do the same thing. I love that you bring in the cultural aspect because especially being here in the Pacific Northwest for myself, I know you're in Southern California, but we have a large percentage of Native Americans, indigenous. And
Yes.
so it's just, I have one client, she's 21, and she is probably the highest percentage of Native, and she's running at about 80 to 85%, and three different tribes that
Oh
are
my.
that are making up her heritage. And I had such a blast putting together her protocol. She didn't enjoy what I had was taking away from her, um, because I was like, y'all didn't have cows. Like, that's not a thing. So, the dairy's got to go, and you didn't eat wheat. And, so I just kind of explaining things to this, young lady as to why her hormones are so out of whack and why she's not metabolizing. So it sounds like you do something very, very similar. And I think that is a huge advantage to anybody that you're working with because we are so just down to our DNA different. And what works for you is not going to work for me and vice versa. So I
Yes.
love that you bring that in. And you said you really go back to all those basics of sleep
Yes.
and movement and what times are you eating and how are you eating and all of that. So I think that's such an amazing foundation. So once you
Yes.
go through that foundation, Laura, how do you or where do you go from there?
So we, of course, taking it in steps, as you know, a lot of clients need it to be a very slow and steady kind of process. I try to start with the foundations of getting into mindfulness, you know, talking about core nutrient needs, going into sleep. Eventually, I get into environmental exposures. I think it's just too overwhelming to get to that level, especially because we're dealing with hormones. So it's so important to cover that. But it is a phased approach, and every client is different. So there, I don't have a set boxed approach with that I apply to everyone. It is very, very personalized. I have had clients in the past who are like, give it to me all now, and I will give them a lot of goals,
Drink it from
and
that fire
others,
hose.
exactly want just one or two. So I
Mhm.
really, and that the pacing depends on what we're covering and at what level. And then they also have need, so we talk about a lot about anti-inflammatory, protocols or recommendations, but what is inflammatory sometimes to one person may not be to another person as much, especially like with autoimmune conditions. So I truly do customize that. We find what works for them. Overall, my approach is inclusive. I like to have an inclusive mindset, inclusive diet, except where needed to restrict for medical
Mhm.
reasons.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And then in terms of any key nutrients, because you mentioned like I'm looking for those nutrient deficiencies or I'm looking
Yes.
for things that are going to make your life a little bit more robust. Do you have any that, they're the nail and you're the hammer on and you are like seeing over and over and over?
Well, I would say across the board, most of the clients whom I'm working with are caloric deficit. They are consuming far fewer calories and nutrients than they need. Overall, unless they're making a mindful approach to include protein, most of them are low in protein. Most of them are low. A lot of them are doing like a paleo diet. So they're not consuming dairy and not consuming the greens as they should. So a lot of them are low in calcium, magnesium, vitamin D across the board, omega-3 fatty acids. Those are the big ones that I see, B vitamins. Those are the big ones that I see on a regular basis. I do request, unless it's triggering for them, to track their food so that we can both see together. Because for me, just telling them something is not the same as them doing it themselves. So I have them track their foods if they're okay with it, so that they can see the nutrients that they're getting or not getting. And a lot of times
Mhm.
it is low intake. So we talk about that and where supplementation might be needed to help with those deficits.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to kind of spin back to what you just mentioned about how most, or maybe you didn't use the word most, but many of your women that you're working with are in a caloric deficit. They're eating
Yes,
far less than they want or than their body wants or needs.
yes,
Um, that's huge right there. And I
yes,
hope the listeners cued in on that because again, you and I age are neck and neck. And that's when like jazzercising came out and the whole concept of, I know, right? Now we just have fluorescent leotards in our brains. Um,
I'm seeing it. I'm picturing it right now.
right?
I was there.
Loss of the butt. Yes. So I know that we were very much the products of move more, eat less. You want to lose
Yes,
weight, you eat less. And it was almost like we were told, don't take up space.
yes,
Don't don't nourish your body because if you get too quote unquote fat, your worth goes down. So it's like your
yes,
scale number goes up, your worth number went down. What are your
yes.
thoughts there? Like, how do you work with somebody if you are like, whoa, I sense disordered eating or an eating disorder?
Oh, I am looking for that all the time. Anytime someone comes to me and they give me a series of fad diets that they've tried or really need to be mindful of calories. I do have one client right now, and that's all she talks about is calories. I try to educate them, but if I do sense that there's an eating disorder, I refer out. There are two demographic or groups that I don't work with. One is eating disorders, and the other one is children. In
Oh,
my internship, I worked with teenagers a lot, and I have attempted to work with eating disorders when nobody else would see them in my area.
mhm.
And I learned the hard way that is, I don't have the skill set for that. So I don't want to cause more harm.
Sure.
So definitely refer that out. But there are in my area of California, there's a lot of people who self-prescribe, self-diagnose, try these different fad
Mhm.
diets. And for some of them, it can be masking a disordered eating. And I think it's a spectrum. And you
Mhm.
probably would agree with me.
Yeah.
Most of Americans, I believe, have some degree of disordered eating. We just by nature, our
Sure.
culture and having access to it all the time, and also the nature of processed foods. I don't want to downplay the fact that these foods are manufactured to stimulate appetite and to be almost addictive.
Mhm.
So there is that component as well. So, but if I sense that somebody has, like I said, a full-blown eating disorder or something beyond my capabilities, I definitely refer out. But if it's something like I'm having problems with cravings, oh, that's in my wheelhouse. Let's talk about cravings and let's talk about physiology of cravings. Let's talk about emotional aspect, physical aspect of
Mhm.
cravings. That's totally within my wheelhouse, and I work with that. It's my craving for health. That's my craving. It's my
That's where
business.
your business name came
Yes.
from.
Yeah,
You're
because
sneaky.
I'm just a sugarholic. So I've been
Ah,
there. So yeah,
yeah.
the craving piece of it, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. So, in terms of some of the symptoms, let's say hot flashes. I like to
Yeah.
call them power surges. Um, do you have any go-tos that you like, whether it's nutrition, testing, supplements, or even referring back to like an OBGYN or a primary for medication?
So I hot flashes is definitely something that I can work with for a lot of women. If we just assess what the potential triggers are and cover those baselines. So covering stress. So it's important, like I said, it's important to educate women so that they feel empowered. So when they understand that especially menopause, that the hormone production, which is of course less than prior to perimenopause, um, some of it is coming from as you know, the adrenal glands. So if we're
Mhm.
going into perimenopause, menopause, type A personality, overstressed, not getting enough sleep, then we're going to have a harder time generally, have more severe symptoms in perimenopause and menopause than someone else who is managing stress. So when we address these baseline just lifestyle factors in addition to dietary approaches, then we're able to improve those quite a bit. So I think my overall approach is to take away or unfold the onion as opposed to let's cover the onion. Because
Better
then we're
and
going
deep fry it.
to exactly, hey, that would be delicious. But
Right?
But if we don't get to the root causes of things and we just because a lot of times supplements are like prescribed like medications. And if we just
Mhm.
do a pill for every ill and we're not getting to root causes, then we're really missing those wonderful opportunities to kind of correct, realign things that need to be realigned. So I really approach that. There are some herbals that I'll go to. As I mentioned, I look at the whole um, schedule of when they eat, meal timing, because as you touched on about the energy balance model is simply outdated. There are other models out there, one of which is the carbohydrate insulin model. So that talks about how insulin signaling can increase appetite, but it's a whole cascade. So when people think about hormones, they usually think about sex hormones and they're not understanding all the other hormones that exist in the body. They're not looking at cortisol. They're not looking at
Mhm.
insulin. So it's like a symphony. And if things are out of tune, you're going to feel it in different places, not just one. So we've got to correct these different imbalances in order to see, improvements in these symptoms. So hot flashes, the research reflects it's generally not an increase in body temperature that's happening. It can be an increase in blood pressure. So there are cardiometabolic ties to it. And if you have a woman with a migraine and hot flashes or migraine with aura, especially, then those are
Mhm.
increased risk factors for some cardiovascular risks ahead. So approaching that, like I said, the root causes of why these are happening is so important so that we can improve health long term, not just improve the symptoms right now, which is important. Don't want to
Mhm.
discount that, but also
Mhm.
improve health long term. So, like I said, adjusting that, making sure that we're balancing cortisol, we're balancing glucose insulin. That is so important to help with these symptoms. And then also modifying dietary habits. A lot of my clients are increasing their wine intake, as they're getting into
What's wrong with
perimenopause and
that?
menopause.
It's
So as
what
we
keeps us
talk about
sane.
that, I know, but as we talk about that, we find that a lot of the hot flashes are happening for them and I've looked in the research, and what I'm finding clinically is not meshing 100% with what I'm seeing with research. But in clinically working with women, a lot of them will say, yeah, as soon as I had that red wine, I started having more hot flashes. So there can be some dietary triggers that can be unique for that person, and just finding out what that is and helping to mitigate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that's one of the and I use this word loosely, arguments that I have with some of my clients. It's like, but they tell me resveratrol is great and this is a source. And I'm like, yes. However, however, it would be better if we just isolate the resveratrol or you eat some really dark grapes.
Yes,
Because that alcohol's hitting the liver. And I find for
yes,
a lot of my clientele, liver support is so critical because they think, oh, the liver is
absolutely.
there to just clean whatever drugs that I take. Well, yes. And it's there to deal with your own body's metabolic waste. It's there for
Yes.
supplements. It's there for pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, all the sides. And so when I start to kind of bring that full around, they're like, oh, wow. Well, how do I get the resveratrol then? And I'm like, let's
Yeah.
see if you actually need it because
Yes.
that may not be the key for you. So I do
Yes.
love that you personalize it and you keep going back to that, which I think is such a great reminder to the listeners that there is no one size fits all. That's
That's
why we
correct.
have all the different types and flavors of healthcare. And we have all the different, supplement products. Then there's people who will choose medication and all the things. And just being able to offer what matches that individual is really what we need to do. And I think you're hitting it spot on there, which is amazing. I'm curious because you mentioned the whole concept of stress management. Now, I personally like the word stress transformation because the moment I tell somebody we've got to manage your stress better, they start panicking and stress out about managing their stress. And I'm like,
Yes.
okay, look, we can't get rid of it. You got to work, right? Because you got bills to pay and you don't want to be homeless and all the things. So how do we transform what you perceive, right? Because it's all perception. Some people thrive on deadlines and missing deadlines and stuff like that. So how do we change your perception of your stress from a negative to more of a positive? So, what are some of your stress management or stress transformation favorites or, go-to recommendations?
Yes, I have a lot of clients who are professionals, so many of them will say, I don't feel stressed. I don't know
Mm,
what you're talking about. And yet I look at all their symptoms and labs, and I'm like, okay, so some of it is if you have the perception that it isn't affecting you, that all is definitely a positive. It can help to mitigate the effects. But as we are getting more wise, we're getting up in the age group.
yeah.
it definitely, our bodies are not as resilient as they used to be, especially perimenopause. It's like a roller coaster. If you look at the estrogen, progesterone going up and down, and then
Mhm.
getting into menopause. So the methylation pathways, detoxification pathways, I'm glad you touched on the liver, so important for hormone balance. These things are not quite as efficient as they used to be. So a lot of times women are doing what they did in their 20s and 30s, and it just simply isn't working in their 40s, 50s, and beyond. So we
Mhm.
have to take a little bit of a different approach and make them recognize, help them to see that self-nurturing is essential. You cannot make you last anymore. So it's just a different perspective on what's happening now is that we have to start putting ourselves at the top of the list rather than the bottom. And mentioning very specific things and reasons why. And you'll still have those women who really don't, because of culturally, don't believe that they should do that. They don't want to take up space,
Mhm.
as you've mentioned. Um, so it is a shift in perspective and perception. But stress resilience is a learned process. And I think the most important thing is what is happening physiologically and biochemically. And if you are the kind of person who grew up anxious, you have, a history of ACEs, or those are the individuals who may have a harder time in perimenopause and menopause as things are shifting and hormones are going crazy in perimenopause.
Sure.
So for those individuals, they need actually even a little bit more support there to see how specific practices can help to, and this could be, through the integrative approach that I do, going to a yoga class, going to a specific therapy type of situation for individuals to help improve what's happening in their bodies because chronic stress is simply not good for you. So you can think of it as a positive thing. And yes, that shift in perspective can help. But if internally you're keeping it together on the outside, but inside it's causing wreak
Right.
and havoc,
Right.
that's not a good thing either. So managing that and increased cortisol results in increased glucose, we increase insulin. So we go down that domino effect. So it's so important to look at, like I said, hormones from a holistic, wide lens instead of
Mhm.
just focusing on sex hormones, because then we're missing
Mhm.
all the other contributors to balancing our hormones.
So that I hope the listeners picked up all of the little details, and they weren't little, they were huge. There were so many things in there that I was like, "Ah, I want to, yeah," but I didn't want to cut you off. So I love what you said, where you can't make you last
Yeah.
anymore. Not from the perspective of, longevity, but like last in line. You
Yes.
can't, yeah. I, how many of us have been told it's better to give than to receive?
Yes.
Or you take care of everybody else, and then if there's anything left over, you can have the dust or the crumbs that's in your cup.
Yes.
And oh my gosh, Laura, I spend so much time in my sessions not talking about food, not talking about the balance of things, the movement, but the concept of self-worth
Yes.
and the concept of being selfish. And when I say that, I mean the women in my session, either in person or virtual, just crawl inside themselves like I have just made them so uncomfortable and offended them in some way, shape, or
Yeah.
form, which I'm sure I do because I say what I want to say. But helping them delineate the concept of being selfish from being self-centered. And we have
Yes.
to learn to be
Yes.
selfish because
Hmm.
nobody is going to care for us in the same way that we would care for ourselves. And that's very different than being self-centered and thinking the world revolves around us.
Yes.
that's an extreme that puts you back in my seat for some mental health work. But the selfish side is critical to our well-being. And I love, 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 love that you talk about this same concept, maybe not the same words, but the same
Yes,
concept of you have to put yourself first because if you don't, you are not actually caring for the people around you as well as you think you are. You're not as
yes,
good of an employee as you think you are, etc. Right? You set
yes,
yourself up for disease,
exactly.
and these people that I get them too, day in and day out. I don't feel stressed. And I just want to look at them, go, yeah, I know you're full of shit because you're an ER doc. So therefore, you know, and
Yes,
so I call them out. And I'm like, all right, well, let's test. Let's test because like that's I'm speaking your language, right? I'm thinking of one particular client. And so we do the test, and I'm like, wow, you don't have any cortisol. Hello, Mr. Flatline. Would you like an ACTH
yes,
challenge? Or do you want to order that for yourself? Kind of a thing like, yeah, you've been stressed for so long that your cortisol was high, but now your little
yes,
tiny adrenal glands are like tired and they can't make the cortisol hormone. So you have almost a sense of apathy. Well, yeah, that's why you don't feel
yes,
stressed because you've become apathetic. So I
yes, burned out.
love yeah, exactly. That's that whole concept of burnout. And I think
Yes,
that we women experience that, not to say that men do not, but we women definitely experience it because yes, we have the ability to go or the right to go and work outside the home and all the things, but the stuff at home is still waiting for us, right? So we're
yes,
taking care of the kids, we're
yes,
having the kids, we're taking care of the kids, we're taking care of the home, we're taking care of our spouse, we're going to work, and then we come home and then we're just like, why am I so tired? I don't know. Why don't you look at your life?
I
you know,
know.
where's
Yes,
your fun? Where's your play? Where's that?
yes,
What is that anymore?
I
So
know. Yeah, so often I'll ask the question, it's part of my intake form, but I'll ask it in session, our first session together. What do you do that you enjoy? And the silence that follows a lot of times, I have to think
right?
about it because so many don't make the time for themselves or to do something that they really enjoy. It's just the grind, like a gerbil on a wheel. And you got to break that
Yeah,
wheel. You've got to make
right.
time for yourself. It's so important.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I would love to have you back because
Oh,
I think that this conversation is more than one episode. So if you're good with that, I would love to have you come back.
oh,
Um,
absolutely. There's so
okay,
much to talk about, so much to unpack in this,
right?
with this time of life. Yes.
Oh, for sure. Not, and that doesn't even include the suitcase of
Yeah.
traveling to Tahiti, where I have come, I always make the joke that, when I'm working with somebody who's in that perimenopause to menopause and postmenopause, that their ovaries are on vacation in Tahiti and they have clearly didn't take you and they didn't send a postcard. So you didn't even know. So that's where my ovaries are going. I've already got that flight
Yes.
booked for them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd love to have you back because I think that there's definitely more to this conversation. But as
Yes.
we wrap up, Laura, I'd love for you just to share a quick snippet of what you do for you to make sure you're not last.
Oh, I've been doing more of that lately. So I've been taking my own advice and I make time for exercise. Well, I always do with my dog because my dog is crazy if I don't. But so for example, scheduling it in my phone. I'm a big proponent of if you don't schedule it, it's not going to happen. So I've scheduled working out at the gym 3 times a week. I've just gotten back into yoga after a long break because of my program that I finished that didn't
Sure.
have time for. So just making time for the things that help me to feel more centered, more relaxed, and a better person all the way around. I could tell my son, listen, if we don't get you to school on time, I can't go to my yoga class and I'm not going to be patient with you. So we have to do this. So getting him on board with that is important.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, that's so much fun. Okay, well, so if somebody wants to work with you, how do they get a hold of you?
So I have a website. It's craving the number 4 health.com. cravingforhealth.com altogether, cravingforhealth.com. I am also on Instagram and Facebook, have a phone number that they can call me as well, 442-444-0018. There's a contact form on my website as well. I do offer 15-minute free consultations for anyone who wants to work with me. I'm also going to be rolling out a membership and some other courses. So for individuals that really don't have the time or the desire for one-on-one work, I will have other options so that they can get the help that they and support that they need.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much again for joining us today. I know
Yes.
the listeners are probably smiling ear to ear in a sense of validation, as they are listening to us talk about you exist, you still matter, and your health still matters regardless of whether or not you have a monthly cycle anymore. And
Yes.
so, thank you again. And listeners, if you'd like to get a hold of Dr. Laura Farnsworth, I will put the information in the show notes for you to be able to contact her. Otherwise, you can just hit rewind and snag it there, whatever works for you. But until then, remember, you can't heal a body you don't love. So, your first healing goal is to learn to love you in this moment. And until next time, take care of you.